Do you have a horse or ag-related business? On the Move has a truly global audience that reaches listeners from every corner of the horse world. We are currently looking for sponsors to run advertisements for on the show. If you'd like to get involved, you can reach out to us on Facebook, Instagram, or email us at theonthemovepodcast@gmail.com. And now, here's the show. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of On the Move. I'm your host, Joe McDonald, and today joining us from Tamworth, Australia is horse trainer Rob Leach. Rob, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having us, Joe.
Yeah, I'm glad it worked out. It took us a minute to kind of figure out the math of because it's Wednesday for you and Tuesday for me still, right?
Yeah. Well, there's a bit of a time difference there, especially with the over in the East Coast, I guess. Yeah, it gets further apart. So
Yeah, for sure. So, um, uh, the reason I reached out to you, and kind of knew who you were to begin with, is we're doing this whole Road to the Horse series, right? And interviewing everybody from who's doing the 2026 Road to the Horse competition. You're in the wild card. Um, but when I started looking into you, I was like, oh man, had I known about this guy, I would have had him on the podcast either way because, man, I can't tell you, I don't know the right term for it, but I'm like a secret, not even a secret, it's just no one knows what it is, but I'm a huge camp draft fan. Like half my Facebook feed is just
yeah,
like camp draft videos from trainers I've never heard of and sires I'll never see and all this and competitions that I don't know where they are, but I just think camp drafting's like the coolest sport, man. And so I saw you, and obviously that's a big part of what you do, and I was like, this is perfect. I finally get to sit down and talk to someone on the podcast about the sport of camp drafting. So that was by far, like, once I looked you up and saw who you were, I was like, I'm excited for this one because yeah, I have no one to geek out with about camp drafting because half the most of the time people here in the States don't even know what it is.
yeah. It's surprising, actually. Yeah. It's not many Americans have even heard of it. So, and it is very similar to what you guys do with the Rain Cow Horse, and like the tradition of using working cattle horseback. So. But no, it's a great sport, and we have a lot of fun doing it.
Yeah. Well, I want to get into kind of what you were doing last week because I assume you were part of the nutrient deal.
Yep.
Is,
So
is that how?
yeah. So the Nutrien wholesale, Nutrien's a big agency, and I guess kind of like Western Bloodstock over there, where they at this particular event they sell about 800 horses, and they're all particularly bred for camp drafting and cutting, like cattle horse disciplines.
Mhm.
And during that event, so horses that have been through that sale are eligible to come back and compete there for some really big incentives. They have a $50,000 age event camp draft, pays 50 grand to win, and then some other drafts as well there that are the stallions. They have a stallions draft that we have. We've got a horse that we run in it every year, and if there's progeny of those stallions in the sale, they can compete. So yeah, we part of our business here, or a big part of our business revolves around that horse sale for the year. So we start a lot of colts and prep them up for that sale. And over the years, we've had a lot of success there. We've set a few records and had some high selling horses when we kind of first had the metallic cats and that come down here. We had a 2-year-old that we sold back then. This is going back nearly 10 years for over 200,000, which was unheard of in Australia for a 2-year-old, for a colt. And then we broke the record again the following year with a with a crossbred filly. So we had a filly because when I say crossbred, we have our own breeder horses out here that are probably traditionally the traditional Australian stock horse. It's a more thoroughbred type. It's a little bit bigger. Um, they've been breeding them for 100 years on being able to do a job, like work cattle, and they got that natural cattle instinct in them, like the quarter horses do, and they just got they're a little bit bigger than a quarter horse, a little bit faster, they probably don't have the stop and the trainability that a lot of the quarter horses do, but they once they kind of figure that job out, they know it's a bit like a cutting horse, they know what their job is and they just go do it. So what we've been doing is we've got some really good quarter horse mares, like all American bloodlines, and we breed. I've got a stock horse stallion here, and we just breed him back on over those mares, and we get these crossbred horses, which is kind of the best of both worlds,
Mhm.
and that be what everyone's kind of looking for at this sale, to go and compete on those horses at an early age and have them handle the pressure and because it's quite an intense sport.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So, I guess my first question, like those crossbreds, as you called them, how would the Australian stock horse breed registry treat them? Like, in AQHA, they have a relationship with the thoroughbreds in that you can create an appendix quarter horse, right? So, like, are those crossbreds? Are they? I mean, clearly they have value and you can take them to the sale, but are they effectively a grade horse in that breed registry, or do they bring them into the fold somehow?
They accept them, yeah, they accept them. There's kind of two camps in both breed registries. So we have a quarter horse association out here, and we have the stock horse society, and there's two camps in each group. So you've got your traditional heritage stock horses, and there's the guys that really like them and prefer them over the modern breeds, that with the quarter horse influence. And then you get the guys like myself that I love both breeds. Like I love what a quarter horse can do, what these cutting bred horses can do. We've even got some random bloodlines in our horses. And I like what I can appreciate what the heritage stock horse can do, and so we've tried to crossbreed them and get our own style of horse, and they accept them in both breed registries. So if they've got enough quarter horse in them, they'll accept them as like an appendix, and
Okay.
then the same in the stock horse society. So a lot of our horses that we have are dual registered. They're registered with both associations.
Okay. Gotcha. And again, for myself included, a majority of this audience not being familiar with the Australian stock horse. Um, well, let me back up a minute. For anyone not familiar, you want to go ahead and just like briefly explain camp drafting and sort of the goal you
Yeah,
go into the sport with.
yeah. So again, going back to the roots of it. So going and doing a job on horseback and working cattle horseback is where it stems from. And back in the days of the open range, the pioneering days when there weren't fences or corrals or cattle yards, we call them. Everything was done horseback. So there was a lot of sorting or drafting, we call it, outside, where we would ride into a herd and cut out the ones we wanted and then take them off, walk them back to market. And so I guess back in the 50s, maybe even earlier, maybe the 30s or 40s. I'm not exactly sure on how far back it goes, but some guys got together and they came up with this sport where you ride into a herd and pick out a beast, an animal, and cut him out and show your horse's ability to separate that cow from the herd. And then once you've kind of demonstrated that, you take him out through a gate, like so you're in a bit of a pen, like a it'd be a I guess 100 by by 50 or 60-foot wide pen. You cut him out. There's usually in this modern day how it's evolved now. It has you'll have anywhere from 7 to 10 head in that pen, and you go in there and you select your beast, select a cow, cut it out, show the judge, you know, challenge your horse too. So where you gain credit is by putting a lot of pressure on that animal and showing that horse can handle that. And then you call a gate, and a gate comes open, and then you take that animal out around a course, which is it's probably 250 foot, 300 foot between the two pegs. The first two pegs, and so you go out and you take him in a big figure of 8 around the pegs, and then you loop him back around and put it through another gateway. So it's kind of a bit like a working dog trial cross between a rein cow horse, ranch sorting, cutting. There's a bit of everything involved. So the horses that we use, that's why I really like the quarter horse influence crossed with the stock horse, because the stock horses are typically bred to run fast and rate is a big thing. And then you've got your quarter horses that can really cut out. So where you get points outside, like where credit's given, is obviously really taking ground off that cow and controlling that cow and showing the judge your horse's ability to pretty much do his job and be in the right spot without you dictating to the horse a whole lot. So and then obviously eye appeal and all that comes into it as well.
Yeah. Well, and you kind of answered my next question too. And for those who are imagining what Rob just described, I can't overstate when you go out of that small pen into the big pen. I mean, it's a big pen. Like it's a pen larger than probably any American has ever shown in, right?
Yeah,
Unless you're maybe
12
out west at like Calgary or something like that.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. And so that's where you watch it and you watch a run or two and you're like, yeah, it makes sense where having that more, and I know they're not thoroughbreds, but like a more thoroughbred esque type horse would pay off for you in that Australian stock horse because there's so much more ground you have to cover out there. Because my next question was going to be, w- um, most people know what a quarter horse has to offer in terms of like what they can do on a cow and um, cut and things like that. So what's the utility in bringing in the Australian stock horse side? But as you just alluded to, they have more run and
yeah. They're a little
and
bigger.
rate.
They're a little bigger. I think where the stock horse shines is that just that little bit more size and length of rein. They can flatten out and get to their cattle quicker. And there's plenty of really really good straight quarter horses at camp draft, and I mean like some really good ones. And I think you know every horse is an individual, obviously, but the way the the benefit to that stock horse is that they just handle going fast a little easier. Like some of these quarter
Mhm.
horses are a bit shorter legged and they can't. They've got to put a bit more effort into doing it. And then when they get there, they can get a little bit frantic. After you've gone and caught a cow doing Mach 7, and when you get there, they've got to rate and check and be soft. Um, there's That's where the stock horse handles that easy because he's a little bit longer underneath and his length of stride's a lot longer, and that when he gets there, he's still idling. I know. We talked about genetics. I've got a friend that breeds a lot, has bred some of the best camp drafting horses in Australia, Richard Bull, and he had a horse here called Acres Destiny, who was a straight quarter horse. He was an imported stallion from America. He was by Bob Acre Doc, and he was probably the most prolific sire of camp drafting horses in Australia. And what a lot of people did was they bred their stock horse mares to Acres Destiny, and they bred this really the perfect horse for camp drafting. And Richard and I were talking about it one day, and he said they tried to bring thoroughbreds in, like straight thoroughbreds, and they tried with the sprint horses, and they couldn't handle the pace. Like they were fast, but they didn't handle that well because they were just bred to run. And then
Mhm.
they brought in a few of the more staying type longer distance type thoroughbreds, and they were fast and they were a lot softer because they could think while they were traveling. They could think while they were going fast, and I guess it's a little bit like a barrel horse or a rope horse or what
Mhm.
have you. They're kind of purpose bred for that sport. And all that, the run and bred quarter horses have been tried out here, and some work, some don't. But for the most part, the good old Australian stock horse, and also as a breed, there's different bloodlines that are better than others. Um,
Mhm.
you can't just say a stock horse is better at this or that because it's just bloodlines are the main thing. The bloodlines are key, really. Like you that horse, he's kind of got to be naturally good and good despite you. You can't make a horse do something that he's not good at, So it's kind of got to be
Mhm.
good despite you.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That's like there's a lot of talented trainers that can kind of get a horse to do a lot of different things, right? But then you take it into a competition setting. They're the ones that really want to do it and are bred to do it. Those are the ones that are going to handle the pressure, fill in when they need to fill in for you, all those type of things that you need on a horse you're going to compete on.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Cool. Cool. So, I guess let's back up. I want to hear kind of more about your upbringing. Were you always in the horse world, in the I don't know, I know you guys don't always necessarily call them ranches, but like the ranching horse type atmosphere?
Yeah. So I grew up in a little town called Mansfield in Victoria, which is down in the mountains. Down, you were saying you spent some time in Tumbarumba, so you know where
Yeah,
Mansfield is. So
absolutely.
yep,
I so you probably know who Gerald Egan is.
I know Gerald Egan very well. Yes.
Yeah, so I went to school with his son Jack, and I know
Okay.
Jack really well.
Yep. Yep. So
Yeah, and
Gerald was a
I've
bit of an
been to
idol.
Mansfield to their place. So yeah,
Yeah.
small world.
Well, Gerald was an idol of mine growing up as a kid, and Gerald obviously was the stunt man in the Man from Snowy River movies, and he was the guy that rode the horse off the hill and all that. So I kind of grew up around all these guys, and yeah, that's kind of it. We had my mum and dad had a small place there, just out of town, and we had horses and grew up around horses. I did pony club. Um, I think Mansfield had the biggest pony club in Victoria, which is the state there, and uh, and I think there was 100 girls and 2 boys, and I was one of them. Um, and so at the time I didn't appreciate it, but I was a bit young at the time. But we grew up and moved on, and yeah, so I kind of grew up when we weren't going off to horse shows and stuff as kids, like gymkhanas and all that kind of stuff, camp drafts, and that we were up in the mountains, which is the Victorian Alpine region there, where the Man from Snowy River was filmed.
Mhm.
Worked for some different people as a young kid, like 13, 14 years old. My weekend jobs were taking trail rides up into the mountains with a bunch of tourists, and then in the summer, we would take cattle up into the high country for those high country leases, and then before the snow came in, we'd go up and muster them all back up, and so we were, it was a very small community there. Everyone kind of knew each other, and the older fellas there that had kind of pioneered that country and their families. Like there was some very old families that had been there for 100 years, and they were very welcoming to kids like me that wanted to go and help and learn and be in the bush. So so yeah, I that's kind of where I started out. It was up there, and then at 15 I left school and went and worked for a fella down just outside of Melbourne there, breaking in race horses, and they had also had camp drafting horses, and that was where I really kind of picked up the camp drafting bug. Even though we were busy working most of the time, the guy Ray Matthews, the guy I worked for, he'd won all the big camp drafts like the Warwick Gold Cup and the Grandfather Clock and all these prestigious camp drafts. So um, from there, um, I ended up. I was about 18, and I went to the Northern Territory. I always had a bit of a thing about going north. Everybody, all these young fellas in that grow up on the land, all dream of the north. You know, it's big country. They've got, most the average size place is probably 2 million acres and big mobs of cattle. You know, like some of those places have got 30, 40, 50,000 head of cattle on them. So we I ended up there for multiple. I was there for about 8 or 9 years, and during that time, I had a little horse breaking business. Oh well, I started out running a stock camp um, on a place called Newry in Argyle, and Argyle Downs and Newry Station. So we bounced around there with a crew of I had a crew. There was about 8 or 9 Aboriginal stockmen that worked for me in the camp. I was the head stockman there. That was really interesting.
Wow. And what age was that?
So 18, I went up and just worked in the camp at Carlton Hill, and then I got offered a job the following year to run a stock camp. And so I was probably 19, 20.
Wow. That's pretty young to, like, have that much to be
Uh,
responsible for, huh?
it's pretty crazy when I get some of these 20-year-old kids that come to work for me now, and I'm like, hey, when I was your age, I actually use my brain. But yeah, it's a land of opportunities up there in the north. Like there's a lot of work to be done, and not a whole lot of people to do it. And if you're a bit of a natural, you have a bit of natural ability, and obviously I got pretty quick machinery too. Like I could drive a bulldozer and a grader, like anything needed to be done. I was kind of I'd throw my hand at it. Um, so yeah, it was quite interesting working in the for a year with these guys had been born, like they were like full Aboriginals. These guys that had grown up on these places,
Mhm.
going back generations, and they didn't know anything else other than being on a station. And they were great horsemen. They were great in the bush. Like, they never, they knew where they were all the time. They could handle a mob of cattle. Like what some of these places that we would where we were working, where we were mustering these cattle up, there were quite a lot of clean skins, like older bulls. Like we'd get 7, 8 year old bulls coming in that had never seen a horse before. So we would go out with coaches. Like we'd take a little mob of quiet cattle out with us and pick them up off of water somewhere, and then we'd use a helicopter to fly out around and bring cattle to us. And we might get end up with 1,000, 1,500 head, 2,000 head of cattle, and we walk them to the corrals or the yards as we call them. And we'd when we got there, we'd sort them or draft them, and there'd be hundreds of clean skins on some of these places that we were at. So yeah, that was pretty
Now, what do you
wild.
mean by clean skin? I've never heard that term.
Just unbranded cattle that had been living
Okay.
out there, wild cattle that had just been living out in the scrub, out in the bush. So yeah, it was still kind of the last frontier. The
Mhm.
Kimberley region is where I ended up near a place called Kununurra, which is probably one of the furthest northwest part of Australia. So I went from the furthest southeast part, that was where I grew up, to the
Mhm.
furthest northwest, and it was still wild. Like a lot of that country's not fenced. Um, you know, infrastructure's limited. It's just very, very remote. So a lot of helicopter mustering, a lot of, it's kind of 7 hours from anywhere. If you want to go to
Mhm.
town, it's a 7 hour drive to go to town on a rough
Mm.
road. So yeah, it was pretty cool. It was a great experience. Um, yeah, and that was good. And then from there, we
Yeah.
stayed there. I ended up managing a place. My my wife, I married a girl, an American girl. Her father was over here. He'd bought a heap of country up there and pioneered it. And he came out here. So his name was John Quintana, and he was a world champion bull rider in the 70s in the RCA. Very, very famous. individual in the rodeo scene. He was notorious for riding the rank ones. He'd broken a few records, during his career, and rode a bull back. There was a big deal there in Billy Bob's in Fort Worth where Billy Minnick had a bull called V61 that had, I don't know, 300 times he'd been out, he'd never been ridden, and John rode him twice. I think the first time for like 94 points, and I think again for 96 points or something. So that was back in
Jeez.
'72.
Yeah.
So he was one of the great ones. But he heard about the Wild West up in the Kimberleys there, and he came out here doing bull riding schools, and he heard about this place called Waterloo Station, which was um, relatively quite wild back in those days, and there was a million acres, I think, or 1.5 million acres. I think it was $1 million that they paid for it, and with it, that was walk in, walk out with the cattle, the infrastructure, like the equipment, the whole lot. And anyway, I think there was supposed to be about 7,000 head of cattle on the books there when they took over, and I think the first year they trucked out about 16,000 head and still had about 9,000 head of counted cattle in behind the fences. So like
Mm.
2/3 of that place wasn't fenced. So there was wild cattle coming in from everywhere, and they were just picking them up and sending them out. And then while he was there, he kind of pioneered that live export trade into Indonesia. So because they were getting bulk cattle out of this place, and he would um, they ended up building a port, or there was already a port in Wyndham, but they kind of developed it all. And he was one of the main exporters into Indonesia and the Philippines and the Middle East. And he exported a lot of cattle out of Australia into the Middle East.
Mm.
Um, and yeah, it was kind of one of the that was kind of what everyone up there was doing at the time, was because it's so far away from the eastern seaboard, obviously, where all the people are here. They would, you know, breed these cattle for export pretty much, and grow them out and send them overseas.
Daggone. Dude, that's like
Mm.
some of the coolest, like, 18 to early 20s stuff. Like, that's a lot of people's dreams, man. That's awesome.
Yeah, well, we spent a lot of time in the helicopter, uh, catching wild cattle, buffalo. We shot a lot of buffalo and crocodiles. This one place I went to, so ended up managing a place for my father-in-law there for a couple of years. He had a steer depot there. There was 100,000 acres up near Darwin on the floodplain, so it's very much like the Everglades. And that's an interesting story too. How that all was was all I guess developed by some guys from Florida, the Townsend family,
Oh, okay.
and they'd gone over there on a holiday and had a bit of a look around back in I think the 50s. It wasn't long after the war. Um, anyway, there was a big place there, Stapleton Station, and it was wild. Like there was no houses, like it was bedrolls, um, no fences. Like she was just wild country and just wild cattle everywhere. And so these guys saw this place, and it was very similar to the Everglades where they had grown up. And so they packed their family up and moved out to Australia and bought this place, Welltree and LaBelle Station, and um, and then we ended up with it several years, or I think we bought it in the early 2000s, and we used to get around there in an airboat, and in the wet season because there was like 100,000 acres there, and the place that I was on, there would be, I would say, 70,000 of those. 70,000 acres of that would go underwater in the wet season, and I mean like 10 foot of water, like, and it'd have floating grass on it and everything. So we'd cruise around there in the airboat, and one of the bonuses to that was, well, the number one thing was the fishing. The fishing there was amazing. We used to catch these barramundi fish. Once you've lived in that country and you've experienced that kind of fishing, it's anything else is subpar. So if I go somewhere now and throw a line in somewhere, and if I don't catch a fish on 3 casts, I'm done for the day. That's it. But but so uh we Yeah, we had a lot of crocodiles there, a lot of saltwater crocodiles, the biggest, angriest crocs that there are. And we used to go out and collect these croc eggs, and because there was a crocodile farm up there in Darwin, and they'd pay us these royalties, and we were getting a lot of money out of these croc eggs, and so that was quite an experience as well, catching these or picking these eggs up. And we also harvested some of the big crocodiles because they were causing a lot of problems. They're eating cattle and stuff. So yeah, we that was interesting.
Wow. So if it, if you got 70% of your range floods, like when the water goes away, are you trying to graze all that and then get everything off before it floods, or how does
Okay.
that work exactly?
So, because it's so dry in the north, then when you get up that next little section, you're in that higher rainfall where we have those big monsoons. It's really tropical. So in the summertime, we'd get up to 3-4 foot of rain. You know, and they'd have these big monsoons come in, and so we had these other breeder places down further south where it was dry, and we would wean the calves and then send them up to the floodplain in the dry season. And the drier it was, the better it was. So the less it rained, the better it was. Like because there was so much subsoil moisture, and as the water receded, the grass would grow. And
Mm.
those cattle would go crazy up there. Like they would just put weight on, bulk weight. And then as it started to rain and flood, the water would push the cattle up onto the high ground, and we just go in there and scoop them up and take them to the corrals. And as we needed them, we draft them up and class them all up into weights and send them off to Asia.
Wow. That's crazy, man. That's just it, and that happens, I feel like, everywhere, but isn't it funny on, like, ranches or stations or wherever it is, like, the land completely determines what your process for that whole deal is? Because I 'Cause I've never heard of anything like that before, but that's pretty cool, and I'm guessing everything has to be, like, eared cattle up there, surely, right?
Yeah, yeah. Most of them were Brahmins. Yeah, there was a lot of shorthorns there in the early days, but Brahmins kind of took over because they were tick resistant and they could walk for water, in those drier parts of the country. But
Mhm.
yeah, we pretty much predominantly had grey Brahmins.
Gotcha. And I have heard guys talk about, like, in that part of the world, yeah, there's horses, but you almost like, there's a lot of instances where helicopters and dirt bikes start to take the place of horses just because of the size you're working at. So when you're out there on something like that, what is the utility of the horse? Like, what are you using the horses for?
Well, like on a place like the floodplain there, we were a bit limited with horses. Like in the dry season, like I've always been really big on using a horse to do the cattle work, and that I got that from my father-in-law. He was he was originally from Jordan Valley, so
Mm,
he didn't know about motorbikes and all that kind of stuff. The big thing for us was handling them quietly because of the shrink, and you start getting behind them with a few bikes and machines, and they'll start running, and then you lose carbs and you lose weight. You'll just run the weight right off of them. So we would try and hold them up and mother them up all the time with our horses. We'd take enough men that we could handle a decent sized mob of cattle. Um, the the motorbikes were never really a big thing for us, even on those bigger places, because we'd just trailer out or ride out. Like it'd be nothing to walk 10 mile with a like start somewhere out on the water and then walk them to the yard. And we'd have by the time we got there, we'd have 2,500 head of cattle. And we never had a
mm,
problem with them. Everything was all slow, and we'd take your time, and the cattle all were very broke to a horse. And
mhm,
then you'd have someone show up there with a motorbike trying to help us, and all hell would break loose. Them cows would start turning around and start the lead would take off, and the tail would turn around trying to look for their calves, and so we tried to keep a machine away from them as much as we could. And even when we got to the corrals, we would do everything, sort them all horseback, draft them all up horseback. Like we had laneways, setups, and stuff, which was very rare in that part of the country, and I think because of John's American background, he kind of brought that in, and we got to where we're even when we were shipping and loading trucks, it was all set up for horses, so you could just pretty much have one guy stand on the loading chute there with a slide on the slide, and we just bring him up in whatever numbers he needed on a horse, you know.
Mm,
Um, but yeah, a lot of these places now they've got contractors. It's gotten so big, and with these companies have all kind of taken over. A lot of these private enterprises have disappeared, and the corporate um, company type places entities have come in and bought a lot of that country up. And there's still quite a few that handle their cattle with horses, but a lot of them have gone to contractors. So they'll get a heap of young guys in there, and they just want to get numbers. It's all about getting them done and dusted. And I hear a lot of stories, you know, of cows, like lots of calves getting mismothered and losing a lot of calves and just knocking the weight off them. And it's definitely working cattle or horseback definitely has its advantages, you know. And I think, you know, if it takes the time, it takes the time, and especially on that scale, it seems to be more cost effective if you have the time to do it.
yeah. Well, on
Mm.
that scale, the positive effects compound so quickly, right?
Yeah,
Because I mean,
yeah,
you just said 2,500 heads, so it's like you gather 200 pairs, you gather 2,500 pairs. It it takes some more guys, but the positive effects are, whatever that multiplication is. So that makes sense to me, and I think too a lot of that because I love the stockmanship stuff, and I've been very privileged myself to be around a lot of good stockmen and guys that have taken the time to show me how to work cattle and horseback in a effective, smart way that's good for all parties. The biggest thing I think is like you're talking about those corporations coming in. There's some people, and it kind of sounds like you're one of them. It's like what else are you going to do with your time, right? Like yeah, maybe it takes more time to work these horseback, but part of this is your lifestyle and you're choosing to do this because this is how you want to live your life. So if it takes us an extra hour to get the cows sorted, like what? That's better than sitting on the couch watching TV or whatever, or going down to the
yeah,
bar. Like we'd rather be doing that.
yeah,
But there's
yeah,
some folks who, when it's just completely a business enterprise, all they see it as is I got to get this cow work done so I can go do something that I want to do. And I
yeah.
think
And
that's a big difference in it.
a lot of it's just the volume, you know. They just it's so big, and the numbers. It's just a numbers game. Whereas um, we we just, I guess, you know, I had worked for some of those companies before, and the difference in everything, like the OH&S stuff, like people weren't getting beat up so bad because the cattle were quieter on when, you know, on these private places. Um, you know, when these kids start taking off after a wild cow on a motorbike doing 90, they hit a pothole or something and flip it over. You know, next thing they're airlifted out to, you know, some hospital 1,000 miles away. You know, so um, there's that. Just the calving rate because the cattle weren't stressed. You know, the shrink on our boat cattle, like on our steers, on our you know, our shipping cattle. The if they got knocked around, if they got galloped, you know, if they had to gallop, you know, 7 or 8 miles of the corrals and they got there, it'd take them a month to get over that. Like they'd
Mhm.
be on the downswing, you know, and then if we could walk them there and they were quiet and they were full and they got to the corrals and they sat down and chewed their cud, we threw them on a truck and sent them to the boat. They'd get on the boat and start eating, you know, and they would stay full, and that way, you know, we were getting the most. The we were maintaining that weight on them, and we were you know, our profit margins weren't slipping.
Mhm.
But I see for a lot of these places, it's just volume, just numbers, get them through, get them dusted. And a lot of people, and I think the other thing is lack of experience because probably at now in this day and age, it's getting harder and harder to find very good stockmen. That
Yep,
that that
agreed.
that wanna go and live in a bedroll in a swag, out in the middle of nowhere for 7 or 8 or 9 months of the year with no television, no Starbucks. There's no mod cons. It's a very primitive way to live, and it's good until you're about 25, 26. And when you get a bit older, where I struggled was, so we moved to the States there in, I think I was about 24 or 25, and I'd never hardly been through a drive-through, or go and get coffee in the morning before work, and you know um, air conditioning and all that kind of stuff. Like, it was all fairly rare to me, and so when I was thinking, damn, this is pretty good. Like, we were there, we were living in California there, and everything was so modern and close, and to go and do a day's some cattle work somewhere, it was a it wasn't a chore at all. It was fun. So I was like, yeah, they can have that back there in the Kimberleys. That's too hard for
Yeah.
me.
Yeah,
I
that
miss it.
would
I really
sour
miss
you.
it.
That would
Yeah,
sour you on the Northern Territory pretty quick, I'd imagine.
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, it
Oh,
was good though.
yeah.
Great
Well,
experience.
like I said, that's like prime male in his early 20s, like where you wanna be, what you wanna be doing, like, that's a lot of people's dreams, so it's pretty sick that you had that opportunity, honestly, man.
Yeah, no, it was good. It was good. But yeah, so I think 2005 we went to California. My wife's mother was in California, so we went over to
Mhm,
visit her for a little holiday, and we were only planning on staying the 3 months, kind of because of my visa and stuff, and we ended up there nearly I think about 9 years. So all up, we stayed in the States. So I ended up I ended up so I knew Martin Black quite well. You obviously know Martin through the Road to the
yep,
Horse and all that. Yeah, so
sure, yep,
Martin had been out here, and he was great friends with my father-in-law, and he'd been out here starting colts and doing some schools and stuff. And anyway, I was over there. We are in California there visiting family, and I rang Martin and I said, "Oh, I'm over here. I'm a bit bored, sitting around." And he said, "Well, come down to Texas." He said, "I'm down here starting colts at I think we were at Tim McQuay's, and I think he was just bouncing around. He was doing some at Carol Rose's, and anyway, he was here, there, and everywhere." And so I went out and spent a few months with him down there, and then we came back to California with Martin, and he was starting colts at a place in near Paso Robles there, called on the Carissa Plains for the Twisselman family. And the Twisselmans were big in the team roping scene. They had probably 100,000 acres there out on the like kind of high desert there, kind of between San Luis Obispo and Bakersfield, and it was pretty light country there. But they had they were bringing a lot of Corriente cattle in out of Mexico, and then they'd break them in and then furnish all the USTRC ropings on the west coast with the
mhm,
roping cattle. So their boy Caleb, he was my age, and he'd been to the NFR 3 or 4 times, and they were always breaking in steers there. They always had, you know, NFR team ropers there roping every day. That's all they did. They'd start roping about lunchtime and rope till 2 o'clock in the morning every day. And they also bred. They
that's
had
like classic NFR guy hours, by
yeah,
the way,
yeah.
that's
They
funny.
kinda have breakfast. And it's usually cools light there about midday,
Yeah,
and then it like,
uh
yeah. But, no, it was a lot of fun. We had a lot of fun. Went to a lot of calf brandings, and I obviously like to rope because 'cause we'd roped over here, They bred some really nice horses. They had two own sons, a Doccolina, a little Peppy stud, and a Playgun stud, and a Dry Dock stud. And they were breeding, shoot, I don't know, 70 horses. They would have 70 or 80 mares there, and so my job was starting colts. Martin was there with us, and another guy called Ed Robertson, who's a very, very, very good horseman and been a great influence on me in my career. So we we would start the colts, and then Martin would leave, and then we would kind of get to roping on them and start them on cattle and just get them broke, and then go out and do jobs, like go out and dock the cattle and all that stuff. But we were horseback all day, every day there. I was there. Ed ended up leaving. I think he'd been there a year. I'd been there a year, and I think he left. And then I kind of went on and kind of ran the show there for Kathy and Rolly Twistleman, and they had a production sale there every year, and I helped them with that. And then I bought a little mare there that was pretty nice that we'd started, and I thought a bit of her, and they had this sale, and she went through, and I said to Rolly, I said, "Don't you go running this mare up, I'm going to buy her," and he's like, "Yeah, yeah, okay." So I paid like $3,000 for this mare, and Jake Gorrell, who is an NRCHA Hall of Famer, and I knew him through our family, or my wife's family. He offered me a job to come and work for him, and so I took my little mare over there to Hanford and in California in the Valley, and worked for Jake for a year, and Jake really helped me a lot, with the finer details of training a reined cow horse, and great. Jake is such a great showman, he's a very good showman, and his fence horses were great, and so I kind of finished that mare off and went up to the futurity, and I get up there, and everyone's kind of talking about this little horse I got, this little filly, and anyway, I ended up winning the limited open on her, which was a
Mm.
really cool deal because back then it was either limited, intermediate, and the open, and
Yeah. Now
she
was
was
this
very
in Reno?
in Reno back when the
Yep.
futurity was in Reno
Yep.
in
I'm tracking.
2007, I think it was. And so, and then so yeah, I kind of drove out of there, and everyone kind of knew who I was, and I was a big time horse trainer. So,
Heck yeah. That's how
um,
it happens.
yeah, yeah, it was just overnight. I was life changing. So we ended up going back, and we leased a place there at Exeter, just down the road from Hanford, and we had a barn full of horses and show horses, and we went and finaled in a lot of the aged events and won the Cow Palace and in the Hackamore, and um, yeah, I did a bit of cutting, and David Costello was next door to me, so I spent a lot of time with David, and he was training cutting horses there. And then the coolest part about living there in the valley was that there was probably half a dozen of the best reined cow horse trainers, like John
Mm.
Rozier and Lance Johnson and Jake and Russell Dilday, and then Doug Williams. And like Doug was another great influence that I had. But I'd just throw my horses on the trailer there one day a week and go and ride with these guys. And like Doug was super, like very good. And again, he was a close friend to my wife's family, so he kind of took me in a bit, and I learned a lot just being around these guys. So we were there a few years, and then had a lot of success, and then we decided that we're thinking about moving back here. And Chris Cox and had gotten to be very, very good friends, and Chris, I was talking to Chris one day, and he said, "No, don't go back to Australia." He said, "Come to Texas, so you'll regret it." So we moved down to Texas and worked for Chris for about a year, and my wife was doing the marketing for him there, working for those guys, and we ended up, um, yeah, spent a lot of time with Chris, did a lot of tour stops with him, and was kind of a part of the show and the family, like the Chris Cox deal there, and we ended up from there. Roger Wagner approached me there. We were at a bit of a wedding there one night for Tyler Merrill, and I was talking to Roger, all the Australians would congregate, and Roger being probably the best cutting horse trainer in the country at the time, he asked if I wanted a job riding 2-year-olds. And so I thought, this is too good not to do it. So we went and spent a couple of years there with Roger there at the Marvine Ranch, and again learned a heap off of Roger, just the structure. He was very, very structured on how things were done. Like he was
Mm.
very, very black and white on how things are done there, and so that was great. And then I think 2011, we had a baby, and oh sorry, no, back 2009 it would have been. So he would have been, yeah, but probably late 2010. We decided, well, we'll pack up. My father-in-law dangled a big carrot to come home back here, and we come home and never have got that carrot. But yeah, we're here now. It's tragically, we got back here, and he got killed in a plane crash not long after we moved back.
Oh,
And
dang.
on our own, we started again, and we were too broke. Being a horse trainer, I was broke. You know, I remember Teddy Robinson said to me, at the futurity one day, I was talking about going out on my own, and he said, "Robert, being a horse trainer is the slowest way to starve to death." So I found that out, but yeah, we ended up moving down here to Tamworth, and we built a pretty good business, and things are just rolling pretty good for us now. We're ticking along, and actually thinking about going back to America for a little bit.
Oh, wow. That's cool. Okay, so yeah, several questions then for you. Um, I guess one, you were from Victoria and then spent a time up in the Northern Territory. Like, what drew you to Tamworth?
Um, I think it was just opportunity. So Tamworth is like the Fort Worth of Australia. So we call it Fort
Okay,
Tamworth.
okay,
Everything's in Tamworth. We have the cutting futurity here, the reining futurity is in Tamworth, the nutrient sales in Tamworth, and then all around here in the Hunter Valley, which is just south of Tamworth, it's loaded up. It's like the biggest thoroughbred area in Australia. Um, there's just something going on, and it's close. Like there's a horse show on here, like in the spring, and the more the busy months there's a horse event on within 2 hours drive of Tamworth every weekend. So
yeah,
it's just there's still a lot of cattle around here as well. But yeah, it's still kind of the horse hub of Australia
okay,
for the
yeah, that
performance horse industry.
yeah, that makes total sense.
Mm.
Um, and then it sounds now again just from hearing your story and kind of looking you up and everything, you um you have done a good job kind of making a go of it, right? And building yourself up and doing all the things you mentioned in the beginning. But um what would be your advice? Cuz a lot of people who are kind of young aspiring trainers listen to this. As far as going out on your own, what would be your advice to those folks?
I would say, and I see I've got a lot of young friends, young mates here that are in the industry, and Australia's a really tough nut to crack compared to America. I found that when we were in America, we had a lot of success in a short time, and people
Mhm.
were pulling us along too with them. Like there was good guys that were very supportive. Here, it's a little bit harder. Obviously a much smaller, um, I guess, genre, or a pie where people are trying to all get a piece of it here, and there's not
Mhm.
that much to go around. So you're kind of on your own a little bit. Um, the one thing I can say, I see a lot of guys. I've had a few kids that have worked for me, and they're all in a hurry. They all want to be a horse trainer. They all want to go show, and they want to go win and compete and everything. And just be patient. Like get some experience is the number one thing. Like there's kids out there that worked for a trainer for 6 months, and then they go and hang their shingle out and they're a horse trainer, and they're probably charging what I'm charging. Um, but they might have a lot of knowledge, and looking back at the same. back when I was 25 or 6, 27, I was very confident. And I remember Chris Cox said to me one day, geez, you've done a lot for her. And mind you, we'd been in the territory and I'd had a lot of responsibility and stuff. But Chris would always chip me because I was probably pretty cocky, back then.
Mhm.
Looking back now, the wisdom that I have now, I didn't have then. I had knowledge, but I didn't have wisdom. I didn't really know that much. I was probably talented. I probably could, get the job done, but a lot of these kids now, they're trying to hurry that along, and that just comes. Wisdom just
Mhm.
comes. And it just comes with experience, like 10,000 hours. Like you got to go out
Mhm.
there and just do it and repeat it, and it's fine to be competitive and want it bad, but don't force it. Because um, a lot of the older guys won't help you if you try and force it. If you can just be humble and let it happen and enjoy it, enjoy the process, and enjoy the horsemanship side of it. The thing that I see a lot is people put a lot of emphasis on the competition side, and they don't put enough emphasis on on the structure and the horsemanship side. A lot of these horses get discarded because they just don't fit them. And
Mhm.
so, with wisdom, if you can adjust your deal and just try and think, be mindful, be a lot more present, when you're training your horses instead of, this is how it's got to be done. And like I've changed my deal around that many times in the last 15 years. It's not funny. Um, and I even end up back where I started on a lot of things. Like things that I did know 20 years ago that I'd kind of gone away from, I'm doing again. You know, um,
Yeah.
for different horses, different things for different strokes for different folks. So for the most part, is don't be in a hurry to go and win the gold buckles and get your name in bright lights, because if you're present and you're enjoying it and you're you're wanting to learn and absorb and take things on board, it'll just come. You'll get a horse one day that's good despite you, and it'll take you to the top. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like, no matter,
Yeah.
there's plenty of guys out there that I don't rate, as horsemen, and the next thing they get this ninja horse that's just amazing, and it just takes them to the top. So, and that's what happened to me. Like when I won that deal there at Reno, I thought I was a legend. Like I was like, holy smokes! I was like, I'm so damn good. Like I never even realized I was this good. And then when I got to ride some other horses, I was like, why isn't this sucker doing what that other man's doing? Like why can't I get this one to do what that one's doing? Um, that all comes with experience, and I think that's the trouble these days is that everyone's in a hurry.
Yeah. Well, that's solid advice, and I'm not near as far down the road as you are or have the experience, that you do, but I I I I just turned 30, and I feel like I'm starting to see that. Like, I've taken honestly, what it took was, like, enough bumps and bruises that I'm starting to mellow out a little bit and maybe not get in such a hurry anymore. Um, but I think that's really solid advice for folks, but it's hard because I mean, the whole industry, like, I'm on the other side of the planet, but I still see that nutrient sale, and like, they advertise the big numbers and the flashy horses and the cool horse trainers like Rob Leach, and, like, how can those guys not want a piece of all that, right? Like, it's literally just marketed so that all those young bucks need to go out and take it, like, they want that.
That's it. It's funny. So I got my son Grant. So he's 16 and he is so dang talented. Like he's been around this his whole life, but do anything like he's got dirt bikes. He can pop a wheelie and jump a tabletop, and like he's like Travis Pastrana on a dirt bike. This kid, and then he'll get on a horse and he'll have that thing loping around with its head on the ground and get it turning around and do stuff. And the other day he was doing something, and I said, what are you doing there?" "Oh, he won't do this and he won't do that, so I'm gonna make him do," and I was like, "Well, what's that horse thinking? What, you're trying to put it in a box,
Mhm.
and you're trying to get him to do what you're trying to get him to conform to you, but what is that horse telling you when you're telling him that? Like, when you're trying to get your point across to him, what's going through that horse's mind? Are you just trying to get him to fold to your will, or are you trying to get him to want to train?" And so him and I, it's funny because you can't. I seen the deal, and Chris Cox told me this 20 years ago, and this is when my wife and I were working together, And then I see Clint Anderson said this on one of his podcasts. You can't ever teach anybody that's ever seen you naked. Like,
Mhm.
he says, can't teach your wife, can't teach your kids. If they've seen you naked, that's it. So Grant's the same. He won't listen to me, but he'll listen to someone down the road, And for me, that's just comes with experience. Like I was probably he's 10 years ahead of where I was when I was his age. Like I wasn't doing the things that he's doing at 16 until I was probably 30. And I wasn't getting to
Mhm.
ride the horses he was riding until I was
Mhm.
30. The horsepower that he's got available to him is not many people get that. But now he's got it in his mind. He's got a little bit of knowledge and he's a little bit dangerous. What he lacks with that knowledge is that wisdom. So that's just going to come with the experience. I can't teach it to him. He's just going to have to figure that out. But the only thing I can tell him is just be mindful of what you're doing. Like, if you're thinking and being present all the time, training a horse isn't that bad. All you've got to do is understand how a horse thinks and if you might be creating a problem, um, because you're just trying to get him to bend to your will. Like, you can get him to bend to your will. You just got to go about it the right way. You just got to ask the right way. You just got to present it to him in a way that is good for him, and that he wants to do it. And we were talking about this yesterday. Like, the power of anticipation and I did a little video on. I'm going to do a bit more on it, but the power of anticipation is a very, very strong training tool, good and bad. If you got a horse that's thinking something and he's got it in his mind, he's not fighting you because he's wanting to fight you. He's fighting you because he thinks that he's giving you he's trying to give you the right answer. He's
Mhm.
9 times out of 10, he's not doing it because he's doing something because he thinks it's the right thing to do, that
Mhm.
horse. So you've got to try and present that what it is that you're trying to get across to that horse. You got to present it to him in a way that he wants to be involved. And riding these stock horses and that over here really, really opened my eyes to that. I think, if anything, moving back to Australia, sometimes I think, geez, I wish we had stayed over there, because some of my buddies that are kicking butt over there now in the world's greatest horseman this week,
Mhm.
like, I was showing against them, and we were competitive back when we were over there. I was in the hunt all the time, and now um, we've come back here, and w- when I was at Rogers, we were riding highbrow cats and dual rays and out of mares that had won, four or 500,000, like minimum. And then I get back over here and I'm riding these heritage stock horses that are out of North Queensland by hard riding. Like, they had no performance genetics, and I had to try and make something out of them. So, um, trying to get that horse to train for you and trying to understand what's making him give you that reaction. What's
Mhm.
making him give you what's making him resist. Is he thinking left and you're trying to ride him right, or is he thinking forward and you want him to go backwards? Like, try and get him to work for you. Try and get him and use that repetition and use anticipation to your advantage. Don't fight it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, one thing really been I've played a lot with this winter, and I've noticed I've started to preach it to, like, my help and, like, the people I teach and all that stuff. Um, Trying to set things up. so that they can come to the like it's not like it has to happen right now, right? Like if it's a maneuver or whatever, it's like something's happening, and now I'm gonna make you do the maneuver. Like letting them find that, which I know is I'm not trying to get preachy about horsemanship. It's not a new concept or anything like that. But what that does if you do it right, and to me, it's kind of what you're describing, it just takes a lot of the anxiety and pressure away from the horse, right? Like if it's not that you're trying to like you have the exact same goal, but if you can let them get there and kind of ferret their way to that conclusion, they'll just do it over and over and not have anxiety about it, like a lead change or, stopping well or something like that. But again, that's really hard, and it gets even harder once you're in a position like your son where how to make them do the maneuvers now, right? And so
And
then you have to have, to your point, the wisdom to not abuse the ability you now have of being able to ride the horse and make them do it.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's about making your idea their idea, and I'll give you an example of what it was. So he's getting ready for this cow horse futurity, and out here, and he's probably got a horse. He's got the horse that he can win it on, and he's trained him, and he's actually out of that old mare that I won Reno on by my stock horse stallion, and he's a really really cool horse and pretty mover, like wants to be good, wants to turn, wants to work a cow really good and everything, and he's trying to put him in a box now. He's got a good foundation on him, but he's doing these fast to slow transitions, and he's like wanting to grind him down and get him soft and make him soft, be soft. And
Mhm.
he starts kind of training on him in these slow circles, and the horse is kind of fighting him a little bit. And I was like, "What's that horse telling you?" And he goes, "Oh, you want to go fast." And I was like, "Well, how do you get him to want to go slow?" And he goes, "I'm just going to make him do it." And I was like, "Well, it might not work, but if you can, what you're lacking there is balance. He's thinking here, ride him there. So if he's wanting to go fast, break him back to a walk a couple of times, in that spot. In that spot, as soon as you feel him wanting to take over and speed up, break him back to a walk." And he goes, "Well, what's that going to do?" And I said, "Well, you're going to get into his mind that that's what you want him to do. When you put your feet on him instead of him accelerating, I said, decelerate him, and he goes out there and he does this 3 or 4 times. And then that horse lopes the slowest circle and he can drive him around there in that slow circle. And that horse has got his head in the ground there soft as. And I said, it's just mindfulness. Like that's wisdom, instead of trying to make him lope slow, what's he thinking? Is he going fast? Well, then break him back to a walk a few times, and just get him to anticipate coming right back. And then
Mhm.
he'll meet you in the middle. That makes
Mhm.
sense.
Yeah,
So you only had to do
100%.
that 3 or 4 times and repeat it. And the fourth or fifth time there, that horse ran around there with a loose rein and he was actually having to pedal him to keep him going, you know? And
Yeah.
so using that anticipation to your advantage, what is that horse anticipating? Are you fighting with anticipation or are you using it as a training tool, you know?
Yeah.
And once you get your head around that, it's taken me 20, oh shoot, I've been doing this since 95. I've been horseback pretty much the whole time. And yeah, so what's that? What are we, 30 years? It's taken me
Yeah.
30 years to figure that out. And I thought I knew a lot 25 years ago, like when I was 20. But yeah, it's getting to where I'm figuring out that I went up. Morgan Cromer was out here the other day from California. She's a cut horse trainer out on the West Coast, and she came out here and did a school, and it just blew me away. Some of the stuff there that she was talking about, stuff that I might have learned it once and forgot about it, and she just shook me up, and I was like, man, how cool is this, And here I
Yeah.
am. I'm 45. I'm still learning. It
Yeah.
was
Well, and that's all like that's how you know you're one of those people that can do it long term and be successful about it, cuz obviously you got to run a business and you got to do these things to support your family and all that. But man, when you love it, like you're gonna wake up in the morning and be excited to go to work still. And
Yeah,
that's
you gotta wanna do it. You gotta wanna it can't be about winning, you know? If you're
mhm,
excited about because you got a horse down there that you like that's giving you that's wanting to be good, you know, if you've like, I've got a little mare down here that I'm taking the cutting futurity. I've got a couple of futurity horses for the NCHA futurity this year, and I've had a bit of a 6 or 7 year hiatus from cutting horses and just focused on camp drafting, and I'm going back this year and there's well, I've got 2 fillies there and I'm excited about getting on them. You know, every morning I wake up, I'm like, "Man, I gotta get down there and catch these horses and
mhm,
get into them because it's fun. They're fun to ride because you can feel them evolving every day. They're getting more confident and they're getting better and, you know, you're not going down there and tearing your hair out because you don't know where it's headed, you know? Like, and that's a big thing. I think that a lot of times that people are struggling, um, because they don't know where it's headed, and that's when they start fighting with them. You know, like they got
mhm.
it in their mind they want this. Instead of thinking about how to get it, they're just trying to force it. You know, so just being mindful, and I think I've learned that just in the last few years about you know really trying to think about the horse more and not about me.
Yeah, yeah, man, that's worth its weight in gold, man. Like a lot of people will hear that and not understand it, but that advice is worth its weight in gold. Um, so when you came back here, and got back into the camp drafting, were there a lot of people in Australia who had had much to do with cow horse at that point?
No,
So
no,
yeah, so can you
yeah,
talk about
it was
like did
funny.
cow horse help your camp drafting? That's kind of what I'm getting
Well,
at.
I think they help each other. So obviously I Jake was the master of the fence horse deal when I worked for Jake, and I got to be around Lynn Anderson and Doug. Obviously, Lynn Anderson, she was had the best fence horses back then in California, and then Doug was awesome. Like he was unreal. And remember, Doug was real big on leaving them alone and letting them think. You know, like letting a horse read a cow and you know, less is more. He used to always say, "Less is more." Let that horse. Like Doug was like a passenger. He never had a spur track. He had road and rock grinders. Never had a spur track on his horse. Rode in a bridle a lot. Never had a horse that was scared of the bit. Um, he was very soft on them, and he could get into them too. Don't worry, but with a purpose. But everything was. He was just. I remember. I'll give you a analogy. There's a real good dog man out here. I've got a few working dogs and stuff, and he's Tony McCallum. He's a very very good dog man, and we were talking about trialing, and I asked him one day. He's a very famous guy. He's telling the guy in the dog world. I said, "Do you go to many trials anymore?" He said, "No." I said, "I see a lot of commands being given and not many being obeyed." And and I got to thinking about it. And I was like, "Well, maybe that's the same. It's just the same with a horse, you know. It's a bit like having a kid, you know, like Grant, my boy. So he's with his mum all day, and she's, you know, back. This is, you know, when they're 6, 7, 5, 6, 7, 8 year old, and and she's talking to him all the time, and you know, do this and do that, and you know, go and have a shower and do, you know, make your bed and do wash your face, and he just kind of does some of those things, you know, but he doesn't do them all, and sometimes he doesn't do any of them. And then I get home and I'm like, "Oi, yeah," and he's like, "Phew, gone," you know, and I don't muck around. I just tell him, and then I make it happen. And so with that deal, you know, going back to that, giving less commands, the more are going to be obeyed. If you're out there training on your horse constantly and just fiddling with him constantly, he after a while he's just going to zone out a little bit, and then your commands are going to be less and less effective. And it's like that when it goes to a cow. So going back to your question about the camp drafting thing, and I come back from America, and Australians are have their own um I guess style of like a stockman, is rolled up sleeves and an old hat and
Mhm.
different style, different clothes. Like traditionally, it's kind of becoming more Americanified. But I just got off a plane. I come back from America, and I was at a camp draft and had a you know a 100X hat and had my shirt buttoned done up and my sleeves rolled down, and everyone's like, "Who's this American looking dude?" Got had some silver on my spurs and stuff, and everyone's like, "Who's this American looking guy?" And I lost a cow there going around the first peg there, and I just won the cutout, and I've gone and lost the cow going around the first peg, and someone's like, what do you do there?" And another bloke's there going, "Oh, he's too busy looking at his own shadow." And that's kind of that Australian mentality, like shiny, you know, is as shiny
Yeah.
does. But so it's changed a lot over the last 10 years and we I learned a lot. So because of my reining background, like doing the cow horse stuff, and I was very structured. And then when I worked for Roger was very, very structured.
Mhm.
And I got this con man stallion. And Conman is the most prolific sire at the moment of camp drafting horses. And Conman is a heritage stock horse. He's by a horse called Dogwood Comet out of a Romeo mare. And that going back to all those bloodlines, it's very, very cadet and all that. Like they're cattle horses, but they were work horses first. Like they were horses that were bred to do a big day, um, and for their speed and agility. And they weren't
Mhm.
probably. You don't see many of them at the rein in futurity. In fact, you don't see hardly any ever hear of them. So I get this stallion and um and I'm out there trying to make him kind of conform to what I want, and I'm trying to train him and make him do things my style. And anyway, I take him away and I kind of trained him, got him to a point where I was getting ready to show, and I'd kind of ramped that up in the lead up to these aged events. Those stockman's challenges, which is kind of like rain cows. We got to do dry work and you got to do rain pattern and then do a camp draft pattern. And
Mhm.
I've got this horse where he's starting to pee and he's going backwards on me. The more I'm asking, the less. And I won the first show on him, and then I take him to the next one, which was the biggest show. And I got there and he went terrible. And I was like, man, there's something I'm doing wrong here. So I rang a guy, Terry Hall, who's like the godfather of camp drafting. And what Terry doesn't know about camp drafting isn't worth knowing. He's like the he won everything twice or maybe 5 times. So I loaded up and Terry actually bred this horse and I said to him, I said, I'm not really getting along with this horse. And he said, come out to home and I'll see what you're doing wrong. So anyway, I get down there and get some cattle in and I'll give him one run and I said, well, what am I doing wrong? And he goes, everything. Everything. And I was like, "Well," he goes, "Have another run." So I go again and he's just giving it to me. He's like, "Bloody horse trainers, you wanna do this and you wanna do that. You're spurring him and you're pulling on him and you're trying to make him do it your way." He said, "Leave him alone, for crying out loud." So I rode over and took my spurs off. And I rode over and took my spurs off and he goes, "That's the first smart thing I've ever seen you do." Righto, so and he's just giving it to me, and this horse, I took my spurs off, and this horse just got better, and I give him a run, and another run, and another run, and he's like, "Leave him alone and let him think." And next thing, this horse, a cow had set up in front of me, and this horse like dashboarded me, and I ended up between his ears, and he's starting to think and make decisions, and and he's starting to take over, but not in a bad way, and starting to join the dots. Anyway, I'll give him about 10 runs in a row, and he's properly blowing and sweating, and he said, "Oh, I think he's ready." So the next day, I drove up to Rockhampton and to Paradise Lagoons there and ran him in the futurity draft there and ran a 92, which is a big score. Like, you don't run very many 92s in your life. And
Mhm.
this horse straight after that, this horse, it was funny, because another mate of mine, he was riding a Conman stallion. We're sitting outside the cutout yard, you know what it's like at a camp draft where you're sitting there and watching the cattle. And he's
Yeah.
riding a Conman stallion too, a very good one. I won't say his name, but I reached down, take my spurs off, and he says, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Oh, this horse don't like your spurs." And he says, "Oh, buddy, bugger that, bugger that." Anyway, I ride in, run a 92. He comes in behind me and he hooks this bugger and has his big mad cutout. He gets out on the first peg and hits him with the spur, and the horse runs off and lets him down.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I haven't always rode that horse that way. Once that horse started to join the dots, obviously I needed to put my spurs back on so I could make some corrections. But
Mhm.
I didn't. What I was doing was I was trying to manufacture it, whereas what that horse needed was for me to just make corrections and leave him alone. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's a good story. So I got a good one for you. So Ian Francis, you would have heard of Ian Francis.
Yes, sir.
So Ian Francis is like another great horseman in Australia. He's the best. He's won more in the cutting and the reining and everybody else. So him and I were judging at Cloncurry, which is like the snaffle bit for charity for camp drafting over here. And we were sitting there judging together, and we're having a pizza for lunch or something. Anyway, he's telling me this random story about when he was in some horse expo or something in America, and there's this guy there carving this Indian out of a big piece of wood with a chainsaw. He says, I went over to this guy. He said he had this unreal Indian. It looked great. And he said, I said to this guy, I said, "Hey, mate, how did you carve that Indian out of that piece of wood?" And he said, "Well, I started out with a big piece of wood and I just cut off everything that didn't look like an Indian, and this is what I ended up with." And I thought, man, that's a random story, Ian. And I didn't think much of it. And I was driving home, and it's about oh 1,800 kilometers back to home. So I'm in the car for like 2 days, and I get about halfway home, and I'm thinking about this story, and I'm going, man, that's a random story. And I was like, that's it. That's right. That's it. That's horse training. You just cut off the little bits that don't look like the Indian, and then you end up with the Indian. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
No,
And that
I'm tracking what you're saying. Yeah.
was like training a camp horse. So with these stock horses, like I had to adjust instead of trying to manufacture that horse to what I wanted. I just go out, let him do his job. And now if he makes a mistake, if he drifts off or if he cuts in, I can just chip that off and correct him there. But otherwise, I'm a passenger. If I want that
Mhm.
horse to do his job despite me, not because of me, I've got to just chip off the bits that don't look like the finished product. Otherwise, leave him alone. So it was exactly what Terry was telling me. Ian was telling me the same thing. And now this is kind of what I've joined together is is that it's not about me. It's about the finished product. So I'm looking at the end product, and I go out there and I know where that horse is at. And if he makes a mistake, I don't make a big deal out of him. I can just trim that off. Like I said, if he's not fast enough, I can hurry him along. If he's a bit too fast, I can give him a speeding ticket. Otherwise, I'm going to leave him alone. And then
Yeah.
he'll get that way where he'll just take over and do the job for me, and I can just be a passenger.
Yeah. Well, it's that whole like you maybe have heard that expression. You don't really know how to start one till you finish one, and you don't know how to finish one until you start one. Like it, being able to see that from the very beginning, like you said, you see the Indian inside the log, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Exactly. So he just cut off everything that didn't look like the Indian, and that was what he ended up with. And I was thinking that's just like training a horse, like if it was kind of like Morgan the other day. She's working these horses, and if a horse went past the cow, she'd stop him. If a horse was late coming out of the turn, she'd hurry him up. But otherwise, she didn't do anything. Like she was just letting
yeah,
that horse find that spot on that cow, and if the horse, you know, landed in a bad spot, she'd correct them, and then pretty soon that horse figured out where to go and where not to go.
Yeah. Well, it's
So
one of those things, man. Like horse training is simple, but not necessarily easy, right? And so it's so hard for people to not manufacture stuff all the
it's
time.
especially when they're emulating other trainers, like you watch someone what they're doing, and and I see this in the loping pen a lot. Like these kids that work for us, they'll go out there, and if there's some kid out there training on their horse in the loping pen, next thing my kids are doing it, and I'm like, hey, what are you training on that horse for? And they're like, oh, well, they're doing it, and I was like, yeah, who cares? I was like, leave
Yeah.
him alone. Like he don't need picking on. Like I want him to trot a circle without you helping him.
Mhm.
So um, it's you just emulate, and that's and it's a bit hard. The camp drafting sport is a bit like that too, because you've got such a small um, in the whole demographic of camp drafting. There's a small percentage of them are professional guys, you know,
Mhm.
that are horsed up and have a program and are very very competitive. Like say 5%, and in most camp drafts you go to, there's 95 runs that are pretty ordinary, and then there's 5 really really good ones. And
Mhm.
also the cattle dictate that as well. Like you can have the best horse there and be the best on ground and keep drawing bad cows, and you can't get around that. That's just the nature of the game. It's a little bit like playing the poker machine. You put your money in, you pull a lever, a cow comes in, and you're like, oh yeah, that one will work, and then you might pull it again, and a shitty cow comes in, and you go and get your ass handed to you. So with this camp drafting deal, you got to remember that the 95 out of 100 are amateur non-pros, and
Mhm.
if you're a kid and you're sitting there watching amateur non-pros, um, running around, and it might not even be that number, but I'm just saying that you're going to emulate who you're watching. So I try not to watch too many people like that. I try to just watch the good guys, like Mark Buttsworth and Pete Comiskey and Terry and Ben Hall and the guys there's some really good young fellas now, Will Durkin and White Young and Matt Moffat and guys like that have got they've got it figured out, and
Mhm.
they can win, they can put them around, and they're competitive and they're successful, and so as a somebody that wants to get into the sport, watch those guys. Don't watch the
Mhm.
other guys. It's hectic. Some of these people that go to these drafts are wild now. I mean, wild. You don't want to watch them. You want to watch the guys that got it together, that have a good program, that have got good horses and that. And then after a while, you'll start emulating that deal, and then that's how your horses will go. So probably the same deal in the reining. I've really been following Casey Deary the last few years, and like that guy. That's how I want my horses to go. I'm watching what
Mhm.
he's, you know, back when I was in the States, Todd Bergen was the man, and I used to get up to school horses at a horse show, and Trapper Lowndes, a mate of mine, he was working for Todd, and I'd ring Trapper and I'd go, hey, when's Todd schooling his horses? And he'd say, oh, about 2 o'clock in the morning. And I'd be like, righto. So I'd make sure I was down there schooling my horses when he was there schooling his horses, because he was the only guy there that I wanted to emulate in the dry work, in the rain work, because
Mhm.
he was a ninja. And so, yeah, I'd made sure I was down there, and I'd see him fencing his horses, I'd go fence my horses. I'd see him circling, I'd go circle, you know, and I'd try and do everything that he was doing. And that, so you're a product of your environment, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. Well, that's wise advice too, right? Is being judicious about who you watch. 'Cause, I mean, it's like anything, right? Like if you eat junk food, you'll probably have a junk body. If you sit there on TikTok all day, and you're probably gonna like rot your brain. And if you watch bad riding and bad horse training all the time, you're probably gonna have some of that bleed out into you, right?
Oh yeah, yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So one question I have for you, Rob, you mentioned it several times in this interview, the importance of structure and how you learned structure from the guys you worked for. Can you talk a little bit about what that means, like having good structure in your program? Is that like how you run the barn? Is that how you're riding your horses? Like, what does that mean to you?
Yeah, I think in everything, like, the way you run your business and your barn and all that, you got to have structure, um, discipline, in how things are done. But I think more so in your riding, um, structure is important, and like I said earlier, using that repetition to your advantage. Especially the starting these colts. Um, and I've started colts every way you can think imaginable. I've tried it once. Maybe sometimes I've tried it 10 times. But you know, where I find that the finished product is the best with the when I go in to start a colt, I start at A and I don't move to B until I've got A. So I just try to dissect everything. So whether it's moving his feet, moving his hind end, moving his front end, lateral flexion, vertical flexion, forwards, backwards, you've got to be able to get all those pieces, and you can't teach them all at one time. You've got to work on them individually, and you need to be structured in that. And so I try and start at A, which is just getting a horse going forward. And I can't teach him B, like I can't teach him to move his hind end unless he's going forward. And then once
Mhm.
I can get A right, then I can move to B. And then once I get B right, I might go A, B, and then go to C, which is the front end, you know?
Mhm.
And then once I get the hind end and the front end, then I'll go back forward, hind end, front end, backwards, So and then I'll go forward, front end, hind end, front end. I'll go A, B, C, D, E, A, B, C, D, E, F, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. So that to me, like
Mhm.
structured in training a horse, every time you repeat the process, that horse gets more and more set and programmed into that horse, and you can't
Mhm.
take that away from him. Once it's in there, you can't change it. So really, to me, like that's where it's important to get that horse to the finished product. Like if we've had a horse here for 10 weeks getting started, and like we send them home and they're started on cattle and everything, and they can go away for 2 or 3 years and come back here, and they still feel like a horse that was started here. Like everything they do, the
Mhm.
way they turn around, everything is all the basics are there, and then it's just experience pretty much from then on. Those horses get better with experience, but the basics A, B, C, D. Like there's 10 steps in starting a colt, and then having the right balance of um of of a reaction from a horse. Like I still want to be able to have influence over him from some types of stimulus, but I want him to ignore some types. So going back and having the right balance of desensitizing and stuff like that, and being very structured in that. If I've got a very feely horse that's overreactive, I'll spend more time on the desensitizing and taking away that reactive side of his brain. If I've got a horse that's colder, thicker skinned and slower footed, slower thinking, I might stir him up a bit. I might whoop on his ass a few times and get him to liven up so he takes his training on board a lot quicker. So
Mhm.
everything's about balance and structure for me, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, it does for sure. And so that's something I've been uh thinking about a lot more lately. Uh because I've just in the last year or so started having folks work for me and ride some horses and stuff at our place. And I kind of realized like I had a blueprint in my mind of what I did with them, but having to explain that to someone, like as far as we get the Colts started and then we do this and this and this, um, like that was what kind of forced me to start thinking about that. But it was really good for me because now I have it clear in my mind and because it's clear in my mind, I'm doing it a lot more clear for the horses, right? Like I as you said, you don't just start blending it all together and trying to teach them multiple things at the same time because I had to sit down and explain it to someone else. Now I'm like, yeah, first, to use your analogy, first I do A, then I do B, then I do C. And because I had to verbalize that and write it down and all these things, now I actually do that when I ride my horses instead of just thinking, oh, that'd be nice.
Well, I find too that when I run into a problem, it's because I've skipped a step.
Yep.
So whether I get bucked off or I get a horse that wants to go fast, or you know have a problem where a horse is stuck, and really don't have those problems anymore because I'm so structured on the process, and everything's a preparation. Everything's a building block for the next block to go onto. And
Hmm.
like I find that, and like I said, I've started colts with a lot of good people and a lot of different styles, and I find that the problem, the times that I had a problem was when we had a lack of preparation.
Hmm.
So if there was an issue there, that horse just wasn't prepared enough. So go back to A. Instead of, you don't take a kid out of grade 1 and throw him in grade 6, he's gonna struggle. So, if you take a kid that's struggling in 6th grade and you put him in 5th grade, he's probably gonna thrive and excel. And
Hmm.
that's how we want those horses. We don't want those horses to struggle in their training program because we've skipped a step. We want them to we want 'em to be content and and want to be there. I was like me. Like if you took me out of 6th grade and threw me in 10th grade, man, I would have hated going to school. I didn't like school anyway, but I would have really not liked it if I had to keep up with these kids that have been there 5 years longer than me. So
Hmm.
but if you're struggling, go back to what they know, and go back over what they know and build that confidence up to where there's no stress. There's no stress there. Like if you're getting to a point where you're hitting a wall, go back to what they know, and then you'll find that when you get back to that spot where that block was, where that brace was, or that whatever that problem was, it won't be there.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So that kind of leads me into, we haven't really talked about road to the horse at all. Um, how I've been asking everyone this, how have you been preparing to go into something like road to the horse? So to go off of what we were just talking about, right? Road to the horse, you have a set timeline. You're, you're on a 1 hour or 90 minutes or whatever it is, and you got all these things you need to get done. If you're at home, even if you're doing something like getting a horse ready for futurity, you can, if they're struggling with C, you can go back to B and then, worry about C tomorrow, right?
Yeah,
And it's
yeah.
still not a big deal. But road to the
That's
horse and the colt starting deals are a little different. So can you talk about that a little bit?
that's a good question. Like, so I'm that structured now. I probably don't ride them for 5 days at home, depending on the horse. I might get on and off them. I might try to circle around it too, but I won't try and put them anywhere. I won't go and say, well, I want you to do a circle. I might
Mhm.
not even do that for 2 weeks. I might just get on them and canter them down the road somewhere and get them going forward for a good 7 days, and not even try
Mhm.
and challenge them. And that horse gets comfortable going forward and gets comfortable following his nose. Then I find all that's there. Where I struggle a little bit with these competitions is that you've got a timeline. You know,
Mhm.
and in saying that, what I've got to do is I've got to adjust my program um, to what I've got to do is, for me personally, is be much more mindful of where it's going. Like not so much just be going through the motions, which we have a tendency to do when we do this stuff a lot. Like I've done that many colts that it's like killing chickens for me. I've just got the process, and when I have a problem, I just pull up and do what I need to do and fix it. But for the most part, we don't have many problems. But in this deal, there's a few things that you can't do that you might want to do. Um, there's there's you can create a problem by pushing a horse in the wrong direction. Like if you're not acknowledging a change, or if you've just got to be very careful, I think. And we've done quite a few of these colt starting competitions over here over the years, and it was something that I kind of we were successful in it, but it wasn't like we do things at home at all.
Uh-huh.
Not that we've got to hide anything. It's just the process. Like I've got a process. So I think for me, it's going to be a great challenge for me, and I'm really looking forward to it. Like I'm really excited about the challenge of the pressure of having a couple thousand people there watching me try and get as much as I can out of that horse in 3 or 4 hours, um, without causing a problem. And so you've just got to be so much more present, if you
Mm,
know what I
mhm.
mean.
Yeah.
Like you've got to acknowledge little things here and there that you normally wouldn't acknowledge, and you've got to win that horse over. Where I get a lot of horses come here that are handled and they got a rug on them and everything when they come here, and they're the warm fuzzy stuff just don't work on them at the start.
Mm,
Sometimes you've got to get a little bit of caution, build that caution into them, and
mhm.
they come in there and they're pushy. They've been patted on since they were a foal and been in the house, and
Yeah.
they've been put on a pedestal. They're little princess, little chestnut mares usually. Um, they come in and they think that they own the show. Well, they get humbled, and you can't you got to be a bit careful how you step into a horse in that scenario. Like I've got to try and win that horse over a little bit rather than you know do things how I normally would at home. And not saying that I don't try to win them over here, but you might run into an obstacle that you can knock out of them in 5 seconds,
Mhm.
but you just got to be so much more present in that scenario, I think. And that's a challenging part for me that I'm looking forward to, is just yeah, trying to get through, trying to survive, and have that horse go forward, and not start something that I can't finish in 3 hours.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Well, I mean, it's a tough challenge, and again, I've been picking everyone's brain about that because it is a different deal, and you can't where you would have the structure otherwise, because we just talked about the value of that. You have to be pretty fluid in how you approach things, because you basically just have a whole nother set of parameters kind of closing you in to solve the problem. It's
Yeah,
not just the start the horse, if they need to get loped down the country road a couple extra days to feel good about life before we start training them, it's not a big deal.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And so in that I think just going in there and getting through it, and not having a problem. Like we were talking about, Dan Steers and I were talking about the draws and stuff like that, and I've talked about it with Chris and how important the draw is and everything. But in real being realistic, at the end of the day, I'm going to pick the horse that I think is going to be the most suitable for the job. But I don't want it to spin me out if I end up with a tough one either. So I'm going there,
Mhm.
preparing that, I might have one that's got a very high self preservation instinct to it. I might end up with a kid's horse. I don't really want a kid's horse because I don't want it to be a drawing contest for me. I want to be able to go in there and say that I've won this horse over, and I've got him headed in the right direction. He's got a good start on him, and nothing's being done to him that can't be undone.
Mhm.
And I don't want it to come down to a drawing contest, you know? Like, hopefully they're all pretty even and we all get a fair shake at it, and I think the judges, you know, just a little bit I know about the judges will recognize that. Like, if you end up with a horse that's challenging,
Mhm.
um, that if you go about him the right way, then that might be in your favor.
Sure.
So, yeah.
Sure. Well, I mean, I don't know. It's like, kinda like drawing a tougher bronc at the NFR or something, right, like that, right?
Yeah,
Or a
you bet.
tougher bull. Like, yeah, they'll be harder to cover, but if you get it done, you'll probably score better.
Yeah. Well, you know, that's where the trail pattern comes in and it gets interesting because, you know, the horse that I normally would pick, for myself, like say if I'm at the yearling sale there at Fort Worth and I'm gonna pick a horse out for me to ride, it's not gonna be the same horse I'm gonna pick at Road to the Horse, probably more than likely, because I've got
Mhm.
horses here that are 10-year-old that wouldn't do that trail pattern, you know? Like,
Yeah.
they're cow horses and they're scared of anything that moves. Like, they're looking at something to work, you know? That old
Mhm.
mare that I won the deal at Reno on, she's 23 now, and she's still petrified of signs on the arena, and you know what I mean? But she was a freaky athlete, and she was an amazing fence horse, amazing cow horse, but she was scared of everything. You know, that was just her. She
Mhm.
was just a very, very feely, sensitive horse, you know, and so for me, it's the the trail patterns very throws a very interesting spin on it because you know, you got 3 hours to get a horse where he hasn't been ridden and never been like had very, very limited handling to where you can steer him left and right, canter and trot and stop him, back him up, and then go and ride him through a trail pattern that's just like looks like Disneyland, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Comes
that's
a
gonna
little more elaborate all the time, it seems like,
it's
when they
gonna be
make them
interesting,
things.
yeah. It's gonna be interesting, yeah. It's not they're not like what we expose our horses to natural bush logs and maybe a few kangaroos and that's tough enough as it is sometimes, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Cool, man. Well, Rob, it's been really fun to sit down and talk with you. I'm glad we've got this organized and we were able to work it into your schedule. So I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Joe. Yeah, that's been good.
Yeah. Um, Before we wrap up, do you want to just plug your program website or Facebook or whatever you got going on if someone wants to reach out to you or see more about your deal?
Yeah, for sure. So we're on Facebook and Instagram. Rob Leach Equine is our page. Um, yeah, check us out. We're going into some digital stuff this year as well with and getting some more online training stuff happening and kind of moving our business more that way. And so we yeah, getting out of more. We for the last 20 years we've had just strictly training horses where we're, you know,
Hmm.
30 horses a day kind of thing. Now we're getting to a point where I want to branch out and spend more time in the States, obviously, because um, my wife's family's over there. And we've got some great friends there that we want to do some stuff with. So, yeah, so we're kind of looking more at traveling and doing some horse expos and having a few less training horses at home which will allow us to do that and get out, do more clinics, do some digital online stuff, and yeah, just kind of get around a bit more instead of being a horse trainer is like having a dairy farm. You just got to kind of milk those cows every day. You know, you can't just go away for a week, and
Oh, yeah.
so that's yeah. So we're trying to change things up so we can do that. And my boy Grant, he got offered a scholarship over there next year to go to college and stuff. He's really into horses and um yeah, and there's so many more opportunities there in Texas, and we've got a lot of um a lot of leads. Like we've got some really good connections over there that we've had for years, and we just haven't capitalized on them. So we'll probably end up doing that.
Heck yeah, man. Well, that's exciting. It sounds like you got a lot ahead of you.
Yeah, no, it's good. It's the next 6 months are going to be fun.
Good deal. Cool. Well, everybody, thanks for listening. If you're out there and you enjoyed this, don't forget to like us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, YouTube, follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, whatever you're listening to. That's the biggest deal when it comes to growing the show is you guys following us because that's tells them that they need to promote us more, and that way we can get more cool guests on here like Rob. So, Rob, we appreciate it, and good luck here in the wild card competition here in a couple weeks, man.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks heaps.